November 8, 1939, Munich, Germany. A bomb is sitting inside a stone pillar. It has been planted there by a single man, a carpenter, a nobody, a man whose name history almost forgot, and it is set to detonate in exactly 13 minutes. The target is standing 12 feet away. He is the most powerful man in Europe. He controls an army of millions. He has already swallowed Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland whole. 2 months ago, he launched a war that will eventually consume 50 million human lives. And in 13 minutes, if everything goes according to plan, it ends here, tonight, in this room. The bomb works perfectly. The explosion tears the pillar apart. The ceiling collapses. 8 people die instantly. 63 more are wounded, many of them maimed for life. Adolf Hitler is already gone. He left the building 8 minutes early. What you are about to witness is not the story of one assassination attempt. It is the story of more than 40 of them. 40 documented, verified, meticulously planned operations carried out by soldiers, generals, priests, students, communists, aristocrats, foreign governments, and ordinary men and women who looked at the direction history was heading and made a decision that would cost most of them everything. Some used bombs. Some used guns. Some used poison. One man spent years engineering an elaborate plot using the very infrastructure of the Nazi state itself as the weapon. Every single one of them failed. And every time they failed, Hitler became more convinced of something terrifying, that destiny itself was protecting him, that he was, in his own words, invulnerable. This is the story of the people who tried to stop the unstoppable, the ones history remembers, the ones history forgot, and the haunting, unbearable question that echoes across 8 decades of silence. What if just one of them had succeeded? Before the uniform, before the warring rallies, before the flags, the Sieg Heil frenzy, and the 50 million corpses, he was nothing. A twice-rejected art school washout from a nowhere Austrian village. The Vienna Academy Admissions Board didn't just deny him, they wrote that his drawings lacked humanity and he could not capture the human form. History's most expensive rejection letter ever issued. He drifted through his 20s like a ghost, hawking crude postcards on freezing street corners, sleeping in homeless shelters beside beggars and addicts, eating thin soup from charity kitchens. By every metric of the age, the world had already written Adolf Hitler off as a permanent nobody. Yet this same invisible failure became the most paranoid, most heavily guarded human being alive. He ate alone. He rotated his travel routes without notice. He wore a custom 4-pound steel-lined cap. He kept living food tasters, actual human beings who sat in a side room, eat his meals first, and waited to see if they would drop dead. Why the fortress of fear? Because by the time he reached the Reich Chancellery, he had enemies on a scale never seen before. The communists, the Jews, he was already exterminating, British secret memos debating his assassination, Soviet kill squads, and, most shockingly, his own generals, the very men who had sworn eternal loyalty on their knees. More than 40 documented attempts on his life. 40. Every single one failed in the most bizarre ways. A last-second schedule change, a detonator that froze in the cold, a wooden table leg that stopped a bomb inches from his heart. So here is the question that still freezes the blood of historians. Was Adolf Hitler actually impossible to kill? Stay with me. This is where the real story begins. The early attempts, before the war. Here's something that will stop you cold. The first known attempt to kill Adolf Hitler didn't happen during the war. It happened in 1921, in a beer hall, during a speech. A group of political opponents stormed the meeting, chairs flew, and somewhere in that chaos, at least one gun was pulled. Hitler walked out unharmed. Nobody remembers the name of the man who pulled that trigger. But the attempt that should haunt you most from this era belongs to a 22-year-old Swiss theology student named Maurice Bavo. 1938. Bavo was not a soldier, not a spy. He was a seminary student who became so convinced that Hitler was evil that he made a decision that would cost him everything. He bought a pistol and bought a train ticket, and he traveled alone into the heart of Nazi Germany. He was going to kill Adolf Hitler himself. Bavo stalked Hitler for weeks, attended Nazi events, positioned himself along parade routes with a loaded weapon, waiting for a clear shot. He never got one. The crowds were always too thick. Running out of money, Bavo attempted to bluff his way into Hitler's private residence. He was arrested on a train, not for the assassination plot, but for writing without a valid ticket, a train ticket. Under interrogation, everything unraveled. Bavo was transferred to Gestapo custody, tried in secret, and executed by guillotine in May 1941. He was 25 years old. But if Bavo's story is heartbreaking, what Georg Elser did next is something else entirely. The bomb in the pillar. He wasn't a general. He wasn't nobility. He had zero connections, zero military training. And what this one ordinary man did, completely alone, with nothing but hand tools and raw courage, remains one of the most jaw-dropping acts of defiance in all of World War II. Every November 8th, Hitler returned like clockwork to the Burger Brekeler beer hall in Munich. Elser studied the venue for months. He identified the exact stone pillar where Hitler always stood. Then, starting in August 1939, he began sneaking inside after closing, night after night, for 35 straight nights. Hidden in total darkness, he chiseled a secret cavity inside that pillar, millimeter by millimeter, so quietly no one ever heard him. Inside that hidden chamber, he placed a bomb he built himself, a device so precise that Allied explosives experts later called it genius. November 8, 1939, Hitler steps to the podium. The bomb is ticking just 12 feet away. But that night, because of fog grounding his plane, Hitler shortened his speech and left the building at 9:07 p.m. At 9:20 p.m., the pillar exploded. The ceiling collapsed exactly where Hitler had been standing 13 minutes earlier. 8 people died, 63 were wounded. 13 minutes stood between ending the war and the deaths of millions. Elser was arrested the same night, trying to cross into Switzerland. Under brutal torture, the Gestapo refused to believe one lone carpenter could have done it. They beat him, drugged him, screamed that the British must have helped. Elser never changed his story. I acted alone, because it was the right thing to do. He was sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp on April 9, 1945. Just 3 weeks before Germany surrendered, the SS dragged him out and executed him on direct orders from Berlin. The man who came closer than anyone in history to killing Adolf Hitler was murdered in the final days of the regime he tried to destroy. Today, 60 years later, Berlin finally named a square after him. One ordinary carpenter, one bomb. 13 minutes, and the entire course of the 20th century changed by that much. Soldiers were the conscience. By 1942, the unthinkable was unfolding inside Hitler's own military elite. The generals and colonels who had sworn personal oaths to the Führer, decorated heroes of the Wehrmacht, were no longer following orders. They were plotting to murder him. Not for power, not for cowardice, for conscience. They had witnessed the Einsatzgruppen massacres with their own eyes. Entire Jewish villages machine-gunned into pits. Women and children executed in cold blood. The men who once believed in the honorable war now saw genocide, and they decided this must end. At the heart of the conspiracy stood Colonel Henning von Tresckow, Prussian aristocrat, devout Christian, brilliant staff officer on the Eastern Front. Tresckow had stared into the abyss of the Holocaust and chosen resistance. By 1941, he was, quite literally, the most dangerous man in the German army, because he had already made peace with his own death. March 13, 1943, Smolensk, Russia. Hitler lands at Army Group Center headquarters. Tresckow approaches one of Hitler's aides, Colonel Heinz Brandt, with a gift, 2 bottles of fine Cointreau for a friend in Berlin. Brandt agrees to carry them on the Führer's personal Condor plane. What Brandt unknowingly boarded with was a British plastic explosive, disguised as cognac bottles, armed with a chemical fuse, set to ignite 30 minutes into the flight, over Soviet airspace. No survivors expected. The conspirators wait 30 minutes, 40, an hour, nothing. The plane lands safely in Minsk. Later investigation revealed the brutal irony. The unheated cargo hold was sub-zero. The chemical fuse faux solid. The detonator never triggered. Hitler was saved by Russian winter, again. But now disaster loomed. A live British bomb sat inside Hitler's headquarters. If discovered, the entire network would hang. What happened next is almost unbelievable in its audacity. Tresckow's co-conspirator calmly calls Brandt, makes up with the package. Can I retrieve it? Brandt agrees. The man walks straight into the Wolf's lair, smiles, shakes hands, takes back the live explosive, slips into a private bathroom, disarms it with trembling hands, and walks out. Untouched, unsuspected. 8 days later, March 21st, 1943, they try again. This time, Colonel Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf volunteers to become the bomb. Hitler is due at a Berlin exhibition of captured Soviet weapons. Gersdorf will act as guide. He hides 2 timed explosives in his overcoat pockets, sets the fuses for 10 minutes, and plans to stand close enough to guarantee neutral destruction. He has no escape plan. He intends to die. Hitler arrives. Gersdorf arms the devices. The fuses tick. Then, inexplicably, Hitler races through the exhibit in under 10 minutes. He was supposed to stay 30. The fuses need 10 to detonate. Gersdorf excuses himself to the bathroom, frantically defuses both bombs seconds before they would have gone off, killing everyone in the room except the man he came to kill. 2 attempts, 8 days apart. One failed by frozen chemistry. One failed by Hitler's unexplained haste. Neither plot was betrayed, neither was detected. They simply didn't work. Trescall looked at his comrades and said simply, "The work continues." Because for these men, stopping now was no longer an option. The suicide volunteers? By late 1943, the resistance had hit a wall of nightmares. Remote bombs? Failed? Frozen fuses? Useless? Schedules shifting at the last breath? Every time. Trescall faced the brutal math. The only way to kill Hitler now was to remove every variable. No timers, no distance, just one man willing to become the bomb himself. First volunteer, Axel von dem Busche, 24, tall, blonde, the poster boy of Aryan perfection. Iron Cross winner on the Eastern Front, he had personally watched SS units machine gun thousands of naked Jews into a ravine in Ukraine. The images never left him. When Trescall asked, Busche answered in one sentence, "I saw the mass murder, therefore I must act." The plan, November 19th, 43. Hitler to inspect new winter uniforms at Wolf's Lair. Busche, chosen as the live model, stands inches from the Fuhrer. 10 explosives strapped to his body. One pull of the cord, mutual destruction. No escape. Night before the demo, Allied bombers obliterate the train carrying every sample uniform. Cancelled. Busche returns to the front. January 1944. Rescheduled. Busche volunteers again, instantly. Days before the new date, shrapnel tears through his leg in combat. Amputation. Next volunteer, Ewald Heinrich von Kleist, 22, son of a fellow conspirator. Offered the same suicide role, he drives home first to ask his father's blessing. The old man looks at his boy and says, "You must do it." A man who turns away from such a chance will never sleep peacefully again. Kleist says yes. He prepares. He waits. Hitler's schedule shifts. Again, the moment never arrives. Kleist lives through the war, haunted forever by the death he was ready to embrace but never got to deliver. These were not fanatics, not madmen. They were decorated officers who had seen hell and decided hell must end, even if it cost their souls and their lives. Yet, Hitler kept escaping. Through paranoia, through sheer animal instinct, through luck so obscene historians still call it supernatural. The suicide missions failed, but the men who offered their lives did not break. And the resistance? It refused to die. Operation Valkyrie, July 20th, 1944. His name was Claus Philipp Maria Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg, a one-eyed, one-handed aristocrat who refused to let mutilation stop him from doing the unthinkable. By summer 1944, Stauffenberg had already paid in blood. April 1943, Tunisia, his staff car hit by Allied strafing. The blast tore off his right hand, 2 fingers from the left, and his left eye. Left bleeding out in the desert, he should have died. He didn't. What? And wasn't one that probably wasn't right, because all was all the time we saw, from the southern to the rest of the broad, we assumed that the principle of the prize and the principle of our major channel sover. It granted him regular, direct access to the Führer's briefings. He could enter the room, place a briefcase, excuse himself, walk away. The larger plan bore the codename Operation Valkyrie, originally an emergency protocol for domestic unrest. The conspirators twisted it: kill Hitler, trigger Valkyrie, seize Berlin, arrest the SS, broadcast a new government before the Allies or Soviets could overrun everything. July 20th, 1944. Wolf's Lair, East Prussia, Hitler's concrete fortress. Stauffenberg arrives with a briefcase containing 2 blocks of British plastic explosive and chemical pencil fuses. In a side room, with only 3 fingers, he crushes the first detonator. As he reaches for the second, to gobble the blast and ensure no survivors, an aide knocks. The briefing is starting now. 1 bomb armed, no time for the second. He enters the conference room, sets the briefcase under the massive oak table, as close to Hitler as possible, then excuses himself for a phone call. He walks out, past checkpoints, to a waiting car. 1242 pascals. The bomb explodes. Roof collapses. Windows blast outward. 4 men killed instantly. Bodies hurled. Smoke chokes the air. From the distance, Stauffenberg sees the destruction and knows no one survives that. He bluffs through security, flies back to Berlin, and orders Valkyrie activated. He was catastrophically wrong. The cruel twist, minutes before detonation, Colonel Heinz Brandt, the same officer who'd unknowingly carried a disguised bomb onto Hitler's plane in 1943, found the briefcase pressed against his leg. Casually, he nudged it behind a thick oak table leg. That one casual movement shielded Hitler. The blast wave ricocheted off the massive support beam. Hitler's trousers shredded, eardrums ruptured, arm temporarily paralyzed, hair singed, but he walked out alive. Berlin descended into chaos. Conflicting orders paralyzed the reserve army. When Hitler broadcast live that evening, the coup imploded. Midnight, Stauffenberg arrested in the Wendlerstrasse War Ministry. In the courtyard, under flashlight beams, a firing squad executed him. Last words, long live sicker Germany. Age 36. The vengeance was savage. Nearly 5,000 arrested. Almost 200 executed, many strangled slowly on piano wire from meat hooks, filmed for Hitler's private viewing. Henning von Treschow, architect of the network, learned of the failure at the front. July 21st morning, he walked into no man's land, pressed a grenade to his head, and pulled the pin. His final words to a comrade, "In a few hours, I will stand before God. I think I can say I did my best against Hitler." And Colonel Heinz Brandt, the man who, twice, unwittingly, saved Hitler's life, he died from wounds sustained in the very explosion he had accidentally deflected. 1 briefcase, 1 table leg, 1 second's impulse, and the war raged on for 9 more months. The ones history forgot. While the grand military conspiracies consumed the headlines, there existed a shadow world of plots so obscure most history books don't grant them a footnote. In September 1938, a German carpenter named Heinrich Grunow positioned himself along Hitler's motorcade route with a loaded weapon. He lost his nerve at the final moment. He was never arrested, and history swallowed him whole. In 1943, a young German officer named Eberhard von Breitenbuch volunteered for a point-blank shooting. He would attend a briefing with a concealed pistol. He entered the building. He had the weapon. He was stopped at the final checkpoint that day. Without explanation, aides were not permitted to enter. 1 door, 1 guard, following protocol. The gap between Breitenbuch and his target was a single closed door. And perhaps most chilling, British intelligence developed Operation Foxley in 1944, a sniper plan targeting Hitler at his mountain retreat. SOE operatives believed it was executable. It was shelved because senior British figures argued that Hitler, by 1944, was making such catastrophically bad military decisions that keeping him alive was more valuable to the Allies than killing him. They calculated, correctly, that a competent German leader might prolong the war. The British, who could have killed him, chose not to. Why he survived: 40 documented assassination attempts, 40 meticulously planned executions aimed at 1 man, 40 catastrophic failures. When you stack them up, the pattern isn't mere luck, it's terrifying design. Adolf Hitler didn't just survive, he engineered an almost unbreakable survival machine. He never stuck to schedules. Decisions came last minute, shared with almost no one, altered on whim. Elser's bomb exploded 13 minutes after Hitler left early, by design, not chance. He ate from multiple kitchens at once. Human food tasters, real people, sampled every dish first, waiting to see if they convulsed and died. He wore a custom cap lined with 4 pounds of steel. Motorcades featured identical decoy cars in shifting formations. No one outside could pinpoint which held the Fuhrer. The Lair bristled with triple perimeters, minefields, and fanatical SS bodyguards downed by personal blood oaths, getting a bomb inside should get impossible. Stauffenberg succeeded, yet a single table leg redirected the blast. Worse, Hitler's instincts were razor-sharp. Time after time, he canceled appearances or rerouted for no explained reason, acting on what he called an inner voice. Witnesses described a man who sensed danger before it materialized, and the oath sealed it. Every officer swore loyalty, not to Germany, but personally to Adolf Hitler. Breaking it wasn't treason, it was soul-shattering sacrilege in a culture that worshipped military honor. 40 plots failed not because he was superhuman, but because he had weaponized paranoia, instinct, and moral engineering into near impregnable armor. Each survival fed his delusion. Providence protected him. Destiny demanded victory no matter the body count. He wasn't impossible to kill. He had simply made himself the hardest target in history. The moral reckoning. For decades after the war, Germany couldn't decide what these men were. By law, they were traitors. They had conspired to assassinate the head of state. In the immediate post-war years, that label stuck, even among Germans who despised Hitler. Stauffenberg's own children grew up in a Germany that couldn't fully call their father a hero. But today, the answer Germany has chosen is clear. The Bendra block in Berlin, where Stauffenberg was shot in that courtyard, is now a memorial. Streets, schools, and military barracks carry the names of the conspirators. The German armed forces hold July 20th as their foundational date of moral identity, the moment soldiers chose conscience over command. And Henning von Tristol is remembered with the words he spoke the night before his death. In a few hours I will stand before God, answering for my actions and my omissions. I think I can say with a clear conscience that I did my best in the fight against Hitler. They were right, and it cost them everything. What if? So here is the question historians only dare whisper in the dead of night. What if just one of them had succeeded? Had Georg Elser's bomb exploded 13 minutes earlier in 1939, the war was barely 2 months old. The Holocaust as we know it had not yet begun. Conservative historians estimate 30 to 40 million lives could have been spared, an entire generation erased because a single chemical fuse stayed frozen over Russia. Even on July 20th, 1944, late as it was, a successful strike might have shortened the war by a full year, saved millions more, and stopped the Soviet Iron Curtain from ever descending across half of Europe. These weren't superheroes. They were a carpenter, a theology student, a one-eyed colonel, and boys barely out of their teens who walked into rooms ready to die with no guarantee they were on the right side of history. They had no script, no safety net, only conscience. Every single one failed. Yet in the blackest heart of the 20th century, they still tried. And that is the only answer that truly matters. Civilization does not survive because good always wins.
It survives because, even when victory seems impossible, a few ordinary people still choose to wind the clock of conscience, right up until the very last second. They failed, but they never looked away. And perhaps that is the most terrifying and most hopeful truth of all.